Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
I hadn't even made it out of the damn driveway before I knew I didn't belong there. The valet kid, couldn't have been older than 20, took one glance at my 10-year-old Subaru, gave a smirk so subtle you'd miss it if you weren't already watching for it, and pointed me toward the far side of the circular lot like I was there to serve hors d'oeuvres. I parked my car myself, naturally, while three matching black SUVs got the velvet rope treatment. Welcome to my brother Daniel's house, or as he liked to call it, the estate. A sprawling white brick colonial with columns taller than most marriages last these days, and a driveway long enough that my feet were sore by the time I got to the door. And that was just the beginning. Inside, the air was thick with that artificial lavender scent rich people love, the kind that makes your throat itch and reminds you that this isn't your space, you're just visiting. The chandelier in the foyer looked like it cost more than my yearly salary used to. Everyone was already in full show-off mode. Pearls, bow ties, laughter half a pitch too high, and wine glasses that never emptied. I didn't spot my name on any of the little calligraphy place cards at first, but I wasn't surprised. I'd been invisible for so long it barely registered. My sister, Brianna, had taken her usual position near the piano, sipping something fizzy and acting like she owned the joint. Her husband, the plastic surgeon who could barely blink anymore, gave me the same smile he probably offered his patients before slicing their faces open. I finally found my seat. No surprise, it was at the far end of the table, next to a cousin I hadn't seen since Clinton was president, and opposite someone's teenager who was already bored and watching TikToks under the table. My mother hadn't even noticed I was there. Or maybe she had and just didn't care to pretend. The thing is, and here's what no one in that room knew, I wasn't the same person they remembered. I wasn't the quiet, self-effacing middle child anymore, the one who cleared the dishes while everyone else toasted each other. That Lena had quietly died 3 years ago, somewhere between the chemo appointments and Dad's final breath. I'd been there every day, bathed him, read to him, took time off work I couldn't afford to lose. Mom? She came twice. Once to argue about money, once to make sure the hospice nurse was qualified. After the funeral, she handed me a brochure for a self-help seminar and told me, with her best imitation of warmth, that maybe now I could finally figure my life out. So I did, just not in the way she meant. When the dinner bell chimed, and yes, there was a literal bell, we all shuffled into the dining room like obedient little members of a cult. The table stretched like a runway, lined with candles and white roses and gold-rimmed plates that probably had their own security detail. My brother stood to give a speech. He always loved the sound of his own voice, toasted Mom for her strength and wisdom, which made her beam so wide I thought her face might crack. He mentioned Brianna's latest real estate success, even threw in a story about his daughter getting early admission to Yale. Then he raised his glass to Mom and announced she had something she wanted to say. She stood slowly, in her signature teal silk blouse, the one she wore when she wanted people to know she was aging gracefully. Her face frozen into that expression of polite condescension she'd perfected over decades scanned the room. And then she said it. I've decided to revise my will. That's when every fork paused midair. The sound of chewing stopped. Even the teenager looked up from their phone. She let it hang there just long enough for the tension to build before continuing. Daniel and Brianna will remain primary beneficiaries. Lena, she turned her gaze on me like she was staring at a stain on a white carpet. I've removed you from the will. Entirely. For your own good. For my own good. I didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Just stared right back at her. It wasn't the words that stung. It was the smile behind them. The calculated cruelty disguised as wisdom. The room erupted in whispers. My cousin looked like she might crawl under the table. Brianna pressed a napkin to her lips like she was hiding a smirk. Daniel shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Classic. I took a sip of water, not wine, because I wanted my head clear, and slowly rose from my chair. Every eye turned to me. They expected tears. Or rage. Or maybe for me to storm out, like I'd done once when I was 17 and my mom told me my poetry was embarrassing. But not this time. I smiled. Not a big smile. Just enough to unsettle the room. I raised my glass and said, "You'll see why that no longer matters," because, for a few seconds after I said the words, the room was silent in that stunned, high-tension way that makes your eardrums ring. You could almost hear the sound of people thinking, everyone running their own private calculations, measuring what I knew, wondering what I meant, trying to figure out if this was one of my usual passive-aggressive emotional outbursts or something entirely new. I sat back down calmly, folded my napkin over my lap like I'd just commented on the weather instead of responding to being disowned in front of 20 people and a butter-sculpted swan centerpiece. My mother let out a small, brittle laugh, the kind that told me I'd surprised her, and that, more than anything, was worth the whole charade. Because the truth is, my mother didn't like surprises unless she was the one orchestrating them. She preferred control the way some people prefer oxygen. Without it, she panicked, flailed, started rearranging everything in reach just to feel in charge again. That night, though, she stayed composed, at least on the outside, and moved on to the next toast like nothing had happened. Like her daughter being cut out of the will, for her own good, was just another item on the agenda between the crab cakes and the creme brulee. I remember the way the room exhaled collectively, the sound of relief when she didn't press further, when I didn't explode, when no one had to pick sides or make a scene. It was always easier for everyone if I absorbed it quietly. That was my role for most of my life. Be the soft landing. Be the disappointment that learned to apologize for it. Be the child who knew better than to argue when told what was best for her, even when it cut her to the bone. But now, sitting at that long, glittering table, I couldn't stop thinking about all the ways I'd held this family together when it mattered, all the things no one had bothered to remember. All the times I'd stepped in and carried more than my share because it was the right thing to do, not because anyone asked. When my father got sick, it wasn't Daniel or Brianna who moved back home. It wasn't the lawyer with his golf club schedule or the real estate queen with her weekend spa retreats. It was me. I left my job, moved into the guest room, and cooked his meals, bathed him, dealt with his anger, held his hand when he cried, when he forgot who I was, when he whispered, "Don't let her do this to me," and I knew exactly who he meant. I remember calculating it once, stupidly, late at night during one of Dad's bad weeks. The total number of hours I'd spent caring for him. Over 86,000 hours, almost 7 years straight. And I know someone's going to fact-check that math. Go ahead. Maybe it's closer to 10. I don't care. I stopped counting once the morphine drip kicked in and he stopped looking at me like I was his daughter. But none of that mattered now. It had never mattered. What counted to my mother was presentation, not effort. Appearances. Reputation. How things looked at cocktail parties. And I had always looked like the lost one. The soft one. The unaccomplished child who needed help, who never quite lived up to her potential. A little off, as she'd tell people with a smile, as though I were a sour wine she still tried to serve with dinner. So cutting me out for my own good was her final correction. Her last attempt to fix me. I caught Daniel's eyes once across the table, and to his credit, he looked ashamed. His mouth pressed in a flat line, and he glanced away quickly, like he was afraid to be associated with my humiliation. Brianna, of course, didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. She sipped her champagne and adjusted her diamond bracelet, clearly pleased that her place in the family pecking order had just been reinforced with notarized paperwork. Later that night, long after the laughter died down and the wine glasses were emptied, I stepped out onto the back patio to get some air. The cold bit into my skin, sharp and welcome. I leaned against the railing, stared out at the dark lawn with its pointless landscaping lights, and let the silence settle around me like armor. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. It read, You need to leave now, before Mom finds out what you've done." At first, I laughed. A short, humorless burst that startled me, because what exactly had I done? Sat quietly while she stripped me of what little symbolic value I had left in the family? Smiled while she erased me with velvet gloves? But then I reread the message. The urgency in it. The before she finds out part. Because I had done something. And apparently, Daniel knew about it. Daniel's message sat on my phone like a lit fuse, but I didn't respond right away. I stared at the screen for a full minute, watching my breath fog in the night air, wondering which part he'd found out and who had tipped him off. I had been careful, methodical, even like I always was. If there's one thing about being the family disappointment, it's that you learn how to operate in the shadows. You make yourself small, you keep your head down, and you get very good at moving silently in rooms where everyone assumes you're irrelevant. And while they were assuming, I was building. What none of them knew, not Daniel with his tailored suits, not Brianna with her $1,000,000 smile, and certainly not my mother with her antique pearls and antique morals, was that for the past 5 years, I had been quietly, deliberately, and absolutely turning my life into something no one in that room could touch. I didn't need the family money anymore. I hadn't needed it for years. I stopped needing them the day I realized I could exist without their approval, without their rules, without asking permission to be who I actually was. I started with one rental, a crumbling lake cabin I inherited from my father's side of the family, a place my mother called a mosquito-infested shack, the kind of place she refused to set foot in when we were kids. I fixed it up myself, watching YouTube videos late into the night, cutting wood and sanding floors with borrowed tools and bruised knuckles. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I listed it on Airbnb, thinking maybe I'd get a couple weekend bookings during fishing season. It was booked solid within 2 months. From there, I scaled. Today, I own 7 properties across 3 states, each one bought quietly under a business name no one in my family had reason to Google. I learned the business. I learned about taxes and permits and guest insurance and how to handle a water heater leak on Christmas Eve from 2 states away. I reinvested every dollar. And when that wasn't fast enough, I made a few high-risk moves. I got into crypto before it was cool. I lost money at first, a lot of it, actually, but I kept learning. Kept reading. Took courses. Talked to people online who knew better than I did. Then I hit big. Ethereum, some altcoins that blew up overnight. 1 good year turned into 2. I cashed out just before the crash. Timing is everything, something my family, for all their money, never seemed to understand. But none of that was the real secret. The real secret, the one Daniel was probably referring to, was what I had found in the weeks leading up to Mom's big birthday. I didn't go looking for it, not really. It started with an envelope I found while sorting boxes in the basement of the house she refused to sell after Dad died. I was looking for some old photos, something I could use to make a slideshow for the party, a pathetic peace offering. Instead, I found a folder tucked into a stack of paperwork marked Disposal, Shred. Inside was a mess of bank statements, wire transfers, and handwritten notes, the kind of paper trail you don't leave unless you've gotten sloppy or cocky or both. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. But the more I read, the clearer it got. There were payments to names I didn't recognize, some of them offshore accounts. Real estate deals that didn't show up in public records. Shell companies. Quiet transfers. And then a line item that made me physically nauseous. A check written to someone I did know, someone connected to a care facility that had been under investigation years ago for elder abuse. And the date? Just weeks before my father's conditions started to spiral. I scanned everything, photographed the rest. I did my own research. What I found, or thought I found, was bad enough to warrant a quiet meeting with someone I knew from college who worked as an investigative journalist. I sent her everything. She ran it through her network, and within days, she confirmed what I had begun to suspect. My mother had been moving money in illegal ways for years, possibly to avoid taxes, possibly to hide it from the rest of us. possibly even to ensure my father's care was expedited. There was no direct proof of that last part, not yet, but the implication was heavy. So yes, Daniel had reason to be nervous. He didn't know the half of it. Back inside the house, while the rest of the family laughed over dessert and argued about who would take home leftover champagne, I slipped into the guest room, locked the door, and opened my laptop. My inbox was full of junk, promotional sales, a reminder for a dentist appointment I hadn't made, a newsletter I never subscribed to. But one email stood out. The subject line was blunt. Green light. I opened it and read the message. We're ready to publish. You sure you want to go nuclear? I didn't answer. Not yet. But my hand hovered over the keyboard. The first call came the morning after the party, while I was still in bed, staring at the ceiling like it might offer answers or maybe just permission to disappear. The phone buzzed once, paused, then buzzed again with that insistent little rhythm that tells you the caller isn't going away. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway, because something in my gut told me who it was. Lena, hey, Brianna said, her voice syrupy and fake in that way only rich women who've never truly struggled can manage at 9 in the morning. Listen, about last night. I didn't say anything. I let her fill the silence, the way she always does, her words tumbling out like coins on a marble floor, trying to land just right. I know Mom can be dramatic, she continued, and there was a little laugh in her voice, the kind meant to invite you into a joke you don't want to be part of. But she loves you, you know? She's just worried about you, about your decisions, about your, situation. My situation. That was her way of avoiding the fact that they'd all sat there and watched me get erased like I was an overdue bill they'd finally decided not to pay. I stayed quiet. Brianna cleared her throat and tried again. Look, I talked to Daniel and we think maybe there's a way to smooth things over. No need to make a big thing out of this, right? Maybe you don't need to go digging into old files or God knows what else you're up to these days. What if I gave you, say, $75,000? Just as a thank you for everything with Dad. No strings. Just keep the peace. $75,000. As if that would buy my silence, my shame, my memories of wiping blood off bathroom tiles at 3 in the morning while they were posting vacation selfies. I almost laughed, but it came out more like a cough. I'm not for sale, I said quietly, and then I hung up. 2 hours later, Daniel called. He was less slimy about it, I'll give him that, but the message was the same. He asked to meet for coffee, just to talk, but I knew better than to sit down with someone who once forged my signature on a joint bank account when we were teenagers and told Mom I was being paranoid when I found out. He told me he had spoken to the family lawyer, and there might be a path to revisiting the will if I was willing to compromise. That word again. Compromise. As if I hadn't already given up everything that mattered to this family, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the knowledge that I'd been disposable all along. Tell Mom to call me herself, I said, and hung up again. But Mom didn't call. Instead, 2 days later, the family lawyer, a man who'd handled our estates for as long as I could remember, who once told me I had a poet's eyes when I was 16 and naive enough to think that was a compliment, announced he was resigning from our family's legal affairs. No reason given. Just a short, clinical email sent to all of us at once, the kind that smells like gasoline and fear. I knew then that she was scared. She just wasn't going to admit it. The funny thing is, I hadn't even pulled the trigger yet. The reporter was still waiting. I hadn't responded to the email. I was still deciding, still weighing the cost of going nuclear versus the cost of doing what I always did, letting them have the last word. But then I remembered the recording. It had been an accident, mostly. 2 months earlier, I'd gone to visit Mom under the guise of helping her sort through Dad's remaining papers, a thin excuse, but one she'd accepted easily enough. While we worked, she took a call in the next room and forgot I was there. My phone, still recording from a voice memo I'd started during our conversation, captured the whole thing. Her voice, sharp and brittle, threatening someone, a name I didn't know, about keeping certain documents hidden, about making sure the timing stays clean. She spoke like a woman used to being obeyed, like someone who'd been cleaning up messes for decades and had run out of patience. I saved the file, labeled it something boring, and didn't listen to it for weeks. But once I did, everything fell into place. The accounts, the check to the care facility, the sudden changes in Dad's treatment schedule, the vague answers from the doctor when I asked why we were stopping a medication that seemed to help. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't looking for money, either. What I wanted was my dignity back, the version of me that hadn't been rewritten by years of manipulation, the self I'd buried under duty and guilt, and the constant ache of being not quite enough. So I opened my laptop. I clicked reply. And I typed, run it. But keep my name out of it, for now. I never answered Daniel's follow-up text, the one he sent 10 minutes after the first, the one that said, seriously, Lena, do not do anything stupid. That message stayed unopened in my notifications, sitting there like a warning label on a broken product, and I never needed to open it because I already knew what was inside, fear, dressed up as condescension, just like it had always been in this family. He was scared. They all were. And the truth is, they should have been. Back at the party, back in that long dining room lined with crystal and floral arrangements meant to look effortless, but reeking of a planner's spreadsheet, the night hadn't quite recovered from my mother's announcement. Her decision to cut me out for my own good had left a weird little ripple across the surface of everyone's behavior, not enough to completely derail the evening, but just enough to make every smile tighter and every toast shorter. The polite mask of civility had slipped a few inches to one side, and no one was exactly sure whether to put it back on or pretend it was never there. I stood with my glass still raised, my words still hanging in the air like a lit match suspended over gasoline, and I smiled just a little wider, not the kind of smile you give out of joy, but the kind you give when you know the balance of power has finally shifted and the floor under their feet isn't as solid as it used to be. You'll see why that no longer matters, I said again, but louder this time, for the people who hadn't been paying attention the first time around. Because I've already built a life they don't know how to measure. I didn't name names, didn't point fingers, but I made damn sure my voice carried to every corner of the room, to every one of those linen-draped ears. I didn't need to shout. I just told the truth in a tone sharp enough to pierce satin and skin. You see, there's a kind of freedom, I said, in being forgotten. When people stop expecting anything from you, you start doing whatever you want. And while the rest of you were chasing prestige and playing nice for inheritance crumbs, I built something real. I don't need anyone's permission anymore. And I certainly don't need a signature on a piece of paper to make me feel worthy. There were murmurs after that. Little coughs, sideways glances, someone clinking a fork against a glass too hard. My sister shifted in her seat and tried to catch my eye, probably hoping I'd soften the edges or spin the moment into a self-deprecating joke, but I didn't. I let the silence grow roots. I let it sit there between us like a witness. I used to think being left out was the worst thing you could do to someone, I continued, but now I see it for what it really is, a gift. You gave me distance. And in that distance, I found clarity. I found myself. I sat down before anyone could reply, folded my napkin into a neat triangle like a curtain coming down after the final act, and let the conversation stumble awkwardly back to desserts and decaf. I didn't need applause. I wasn't performing. I had said what I came to say, and they could pretend it didn't hit them, but I saw it in their faces, in their twitching hands and clenched jaws. It landed. And it would keep landing, long after the party ended. 1 week later, the story broke. The article didn't use my name. I'd made sure of that, but it didn't need to. Anyone close enough to the situation knew exactly who had opened the vault. The headline was vague enough to protect identities, but specific enough to cause chaos. Well-known family under investigation for financial misconduct, questionable end-of-life decisions. The piece was meticulous, factual, dry in tone but devastating in implication. A few lines were redacted, likely on advice of legal counsel, but the heart of it beat loudly enough for anyone paying attention. Whispers turned to questions. Questions turned into inquiries. My mother's phone stopped ringing. My brother's firm posted a statement distancing itself from the story, and Brianna, for the first time in her glossy, curated life, locked down her social media and canceled a speaking engagement. And me? I was already gone. No dramatic exit. No confrontation. Just a forwarding address that didn't forward, and a prepaid phone I dumped in a trash can outside a truck stop somewhere in upstate New York. I changed my number, booked a flight, used a passport I'd renewed quietly 6 months earlier when I started planning all of this. My name is different now, though I haven't decided how long I'll keep it. The air in Lisbon tastes different, salter, softer, cleaner, like it hasn't been filtered through generations of expectation. I rent a small place overlooking the water. It's nothing like Daniel's estate. The tiles are chipped. The plumbing groans when it's tired. But I wake up with the sun, I sleep without panic, and for the first time in my life, there's nothing left I need to prove to anyone. I mentor a few girls here, young women who remind me of myself at 17, fierce and invisible, waiting to be told they matter. I don't give them speeches. I just show up. That's enough. Sometimes I still think about that party. The exact moment when the whole damn house of cards began to tilt. I wonder if they talk about it, if they figured out how much I knew, how long I'd been planning. I wonder if Mom finally understood what she'd done, if she realized that her greatest punishment had set me free. But I don't wait for an answer. I don't need it anymore. Some chains are made of gold. Cutting me out of your will wasn't punishment, Mom. It was the first favor you ever did for me.